Greetings, welcome to Facts About Everything. I'm your host, James Egan. Today, I'm going to look at the X-Men leader and founder, Professor X. Although he is elderly and crippled, there's one thing people keep forgetting about Professor X. He's a ladies' man. He's had many girlfriends, including Amelia Vogt, Mystique, don't ask, Emma Frost, Lilandra of the Shi'ar Empire, and Moira McTaggart. And that is the first fact about Professor X. Let's dive in. Charles Francis Xavier debuted in X-Men #1 in 1963. His appearance was based on the actor Yul Brynner. Brynner is best known for playing Ramesses in The Ten Commandments and the King of Siam in The King and I. Professor X obtained his psychic abilities during puberty when his mutant gene activated. This mutation gave Charles Xavier telepathic powers so he can read and control people's minds. Xavier is a level 10 psychic, the most powerful type of psychic in the world. Weirdly, it wasn't public knowledge that Professor X was a mutant until 2001. Charles Xavier has a net worth of approximately $3.5 billion. Many people assume Professor X is confined to a wheelchair because Magneto broke his back. This explanation was used for the X-Men cartoon and the films. However, in the comics, it was an alien called Lucifer that paralyzed Professor X by dropping a boulder on him. Sounds like something Wile E. Coyote would do. Lucifer was intended to be Professor X's nemesis. Unfortunately, the readers didn't find him interesting, so the writers got rid of him and never mentioned him again. There's a comic book called What If Magneto Had Formed the X-Men with Professor X, which was released in 2004. He has a PhD in genetics, biophysics, psychology, and anthropology. Once he pretended to lose his psychic powers to see if the X-Men could defeat Magneto without his aid. Wow, Xavier is a horrible teacher. Charles Xavier is sometimes drawn to resemble Patrick Stewart. IGN did a poll of the greatest X-Men ever in 2006, and Professor X was ranked at #2. In case you were wondering, #1 was not Wolverine. Now let's look at an extremely important thing in Professor X's history. When Professor X was in Egypt many years ago, he met a large Middle Eastern man called Amal Farouk. But Amal Farouk wasn't really a human. He is a being of pure psychic energy that feeds off the hatred of humanity. He has the power of telepathy, possession, and immortality. This was the first time Professor X realized that there was beings that were so dangerous that they could only be stopped by mutants like himself. Farouk indirectly inspired the Professor to create the X-Men. Charles Xavier can project a spiritual version of himself through the astral plane. The astral plane is a psychic universe. As you've seen in the Doctor Strange film, Strange can also travel through the psychic dimension. Charles Xavier originally taught the X-Men how to use their powers in his school, the Xavier Institute for Higher Learning. When Charles Xavier asked Wolverine to join the X-Men, many people assumed this was the first time the two met. But it wasn't. Years ago, Wolverine was brainwashed to kill Xavier. As he got close, the Professor wiped the brainwashed section of Wolverine's mind. Instead of sending him away, Xavier implanted the idea in Wolverine's mind that would eventually make him join the X-Men. X-Men sold so poorly at first that Marvel took desperate measures to prevent its cancellation and killed off Professor X. Sadly, this did not affect the sales, so they hoped bringing him back would make a difference. It didn't, and the series was cancelled one issue later. X-Men went to hiatus for 5 years. It became incredibly popular when it returned, and has remained successful ever since. Charles Xavier can use his psychic powers to give himself amnesia. He keeps forgetting he has his power, since he can't remember what he did that caused him to wipe his memory in the first place. Although he's confined to a wheelchair, Professor Charles Xavier is incredibly agile. He practices with trapeze strings to maintain his strength. While swinging these strings, he can do a flip. Okay guys, this barely ever happens, but I actually can't find an image to prove this. But I know he can do a flip with trapeze. It's in Uncanny X-Men 389. I just don't have the issue with me. So, I make mistakes, I'm only human. What do you want from me? When Xavier was cloned in a new body, I'll explain that later, his new body had functional legs which allowed Xavier to walk again. However, he started feeling psychosomatic pain in his legs because he'd been a paraplegic for so long. This wore off over time. When Xavier had his legs healed, he briefly became an active field member of the X-Men and fought alongside them. But this didn't last long because it's a comic, it always goes back to the way it was, that's just the way things are. So the Shadow King damaged Xavier's spine, forcing him to be handicapped once again. Professor X has died loads of times. Frankly, once or too many. The subterranean monster, Grotesque, blew up the Professor in an explosion, supposedly killing him. It was later unveiled that the Professor wasn't really Xavier. Instead, it was a shape-shifting mutant that took on the role of Xavier while the real Professor was in seclusion, enhancing his telepathic powers for an upcoming alien attack. An alien called the Brood laid an egg inside Xavier, turning him into a Brood Queen. He returned to life when his mind was transferred into a clone body. That was the clone body I mentioned earlier. He suffered a heart attack during Magneto's trial and died. He was resurrected with alien technology. Professor X's time-traveling son, Legion, killed him by accident when he tried to kill Magneto. This death was undone when Bishop went back in time and stopped Legion from killing Xavier. Is that the third time he died? I'm losing count. Xavier had his spine healed with robotic nanites which allowed him to walk again. The nanites were inevitably short-circuited by Magneto, which confined Xavier to a wheelchair yet again. He just can't get a break, can he? He got shot in the head by Bishop, who was trying to shoot a baby. It's a really long story. Xavier's brain was healed by the mutant Exodus. After Exodus resuscitated him, Xavier realized that he had lost chunks of his memory. When Scarlet Witch rewrote reality, she allowed Xavier to walk again. And you're probably thinking, oh, he's gonna be crippled for a fourth time. Nope, Cyclops just killed him. I mean, Cyclops was possessed by the Phoenix, but he's still a jerk. Apparently, Xavier has come back to life just very recently in the comics, but I don't want to mention it because it might be an alien or a clone or a duplicate or time travel or something like that, so let me just wait and see how that plays out in the future before I mention it in another video. Charles Xavier fought in the Korean War. Due to his time in the war, Xavier is an excellent hand-to-hand fighter. When he fought in Korea, he was surrounded by terrified soldiers for several months. He unconsciously experienced the same terror and rage as they would because their emotions were so intense. To prevent himself from going insane, Xavier created psychic shields within his own mind to control any negative emotion. This is why Xavier is so repressed and rarely acts out any negative emotions, even in the direst situations. All the X-Men are highly resistant to psychic attacks after training with Xavier. Since Xavier has tried for decades to bring peace to the world, he's been nicknamed the telepathic Mahatma Gandhi of the mutant world. Pretty much everybody knows that Professor X can read and control minds, but even die-hard fans don't realize that Professor X is also telekinetic. His telekinetic power is very limited and he only uses it when it is necessary. He believes if he kept pushing his telekinesis, he would regain his ability to walk. Charles Xavier's first main love interest was Moira McTaggart, who do you know from the X-Men movies, played by Rose Byrne. Moira broke up with Xavier when she felt like he wanted to build an army of mutants rather than a school that taught them how to control their powers. Xavier can use his powers on mutants, so they thought they trained with their powers for months, when in fact only a few hours went by. The X-Men cartoon of the 90s was created by Eric and Julia Lewald. Eric Lewald said his favorite X-Men of all time is Professor X. In 2013, IGN's top 100 comic book heroes ranked Professor Charles Xavier at number 22. When Xavier lost the use of his legs, he developed clinical depression. He rebuilt the mutant nation of Genosha after it was destroyed by a Sentinel. Charles worked at a Holocaust survivor clinic in Israel after his time in Korea. He used his telepathic power to quell the trauma of the Holocaust survivors. It was here where he met Magneto. Also, I've done a video about Magneto. I'll leave a link at the end of this video. The X-Men recently learned that Xavier has mind-wiped them several times without their permission. Xavier did this to remove traumatic experiences from their life. Nevertheless, they stopped trusting him, and Cyclops never forgave him. Now you might be thinking, but Professor X would never do that. He's one of the kindest, purest people ever. Xavier devised secret plans on how to take out the X-Men if they ever became evil or brainwashed. These plans are called the Xavier Protocols. This protocol is quite justifiable as mutants like Wolverine are prone to mind control. According to the protocols, Wolverine should be killed with, quote, a long-range attack, sever the head, and place the head and body apart. To coax Rogue into joining the X-Men, Xavier pretended that he could cure her of her deathly touch. In hindsight, he found the tactic extremely manipulative and wrong. The first group of X-Men were Cyclops, Jean Grey, Angel, Beast, and Iceman, when they were all trapped on a sentient island called Krakoa. Islands can be alive in comics. And then the island joined the X-Men in the later issue, but that doesn't matter. Xavier sent a bunch of teenage mutants called Petra, Vulcan, Sway, and Darwin. Most of them were killed. Xavier realized that he blindly sent children to their deaths for his cause. To this day, it is his greatest regret. Although Professor X is the most powerful psychic, he can be even more powerful if he uses his device, Cerebro. Cerebro is a machine that enhances his telepathic abilities. When Cerebro was originally built, it could influence people from 250 miles. Cerebro was built by Professor X and Jean Grey. The prototype to Cerebro was Cyberno. Professor X used it to locate the first X-Man, Cyclops. Also, let me know if you want me to do a video about Cyclops. Originally, if Professor X had to use Cerebro, he would have to go to the Cerebro room in his mansion. Over time, Cerebro was programmed into a mobile system so Xavier or other telepaths could carry it around with them. Magneto can't be found with Cerebro. Magneto naturally creates electromagnetic fields which compromises Cerebro's ability to locate him. Cerebro is Portuguese and Spanish for brain. S.H.I.E.L.D. created their own version of Cerebro. When Magneto learned of this, he erased its entire mutant database. Only a powerful psychic can use Cerebro. An untrained psychic could suffer comatose or brain damage if they use the machine. But the machine has been used by Professor X, Jean Grey, Emma Frost, Rachel Summers, Psylocke, and the Stepford Cuckoos. When a character called Cerebro was introduced into the story, the writers changed the name of Professor X's device to Cerebra to avoid confusion. Why didn't you just call the character anything else? Brain Man, like anything. In the 2000 film X-Men, Professor X activates Cerebro by wearing a headset which allows him to see every mutant in the world. In X-Men 2, Cerebro has been upgraded so when the Professor wears the headset, everyone in the room can see what he sees. This is how Cerebro works in the comics. Beast created a portable Cerebro that non-psychics like himself can use to locate mutants. In the third issue of X-Men, Professor Charles Xavier admitted that he loved Jean Grey when she was 15. Now, we can all say that it was the 1960s, it was a different time, that doesn't mean it's justified, but that was quite common. I mean, Elvis Presley's wife was like 16 or 17, wasn't she? But here's the thing, they brought this up again in the 1990s. You just couldn't let it die, could you, Marvel? And then they rebooted the X-Men in the millennium. Great, fresh start. You can make the X-Men more modern, more relatable to millennials. So how are you going to change Professor X? Oh, come on! Why would you put that in again? And finally, despite the fact Charles Xavier is considered to be a pacifist, he carries a gun with him at all times. If he believes a psychic is about to take control of his mind, he will shoot himself in the head, rather than allow an enemy to control the most powerful psychic mind in the world. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe. If there's any other X-Men you want me to talk about, Beast, Jean Grey, Gambit, or any of the X-Men villains or films, let me know and I'll upload a video as soon as possible. To learn more facts, check out my books on Amazon. They're available on paperback and Kindle. Thanks for watching. See you again.